Good evening. I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight. And before we get started, I wanted to share a story with you. It was such a beautiful day today. This morning I was out in my garden and I saw the robins and I heard the cardinals, and in the distance I heard the hawk, and then I got buzzed by a hummingbird. And so then, then I hear this sound, this familiar sound. I don't know what that sound is. And that sound, do you know that the town of Hartland has its very own town bird? It's called a mosquito. It's about this big. Maybe you've seen some of them. Well, I'm Fred Jones, and I'm filling in for our president, Mark Zonig, who can't be here tonight, but he sends his good wishes to all. I'd like to begin by thanking all who participated in the annual Connecticut Trails Day hike last Saturday morning. We had a record 71 participants. And thanks go out to Susan Pearson for organizing our hike, and to Pam and Steve Emmons for once again being our hike leaders. I also want to thank our directors, officers, donors, members, and volunteers who made this year very successful and productive. You may have noticed that we have the reprint of our Moose t-shirts for sale, along with hats, calendars, and note cards. Thanks go out to Carol Vincent and her daughter Tracy for their work on the successful fundraising project. We also have for sale some handcrafted Hartland signs made and donated by board director Chris Anderson. Thank you, Chris. I'd also like to thank our newest director, Amanda Lukenbiel, for her work on the pollinator garden in the back of the school by the playground. We just viewed it this evening. If you get a chance, you should walk out there and see it. It's beautiful. Thank you, Amanda. And also thanks again to Mark Bombard for his recording our programs for Granby TV. Directly after our presentation, refreshments will be available in the kitchen area. Please stay and join us. There are a few donation jars placed around the tables tonight. I want to thank everyone for supporting us with your donations, which help provide educational programs such as this one tonight. This is our 13th annual forum. Our Outreach and Education Chair, Alana Bordwick, works behind the scenes, organizing these speaker series programs. Thank you, Alana. Over the years, we've had presentations on moose, bears, coyotes, porcupines, you name it. But who do we have for you tonight? We have Audubon Sharon to tell us about owls and more. Our presenter this evening, Eileen Fielding, Audubon Sharon Director.
Thank you for coming. I'm about to put this microphone down because it's very difficult to orient to two microphones at once, plus handle large, fierce birds. That's kind of a recipe for confusion. So I'm going to try to project. How are you in the back? Can you hear what I'm saying? Okay. If I fade away, wave at me, and I'll crank the volume back up. That's enough technology. So again, thank you for the invitation. It's really fun to be here tonight, partly because this is a little bit like a reunion for me. There are members of the Hartland Land Trust and other folks from the Farmington Valley here. And I'm doing a little bit of a comeback to this area because of all the years that I spent as executive director of the Farmington River Watershed Association. That was a great gig for quite a while. Before that, I worked at another watershed association, and some people seemed to be a little confused when they saw that I had made the jump over to the Audubon Society. But as a matter of fact, I was kind of reverting to my roots. because before I got a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology at UConn, studying, of all things, desert fish, really, they exist, I was very deeply involved in the world of nature centers, nature education, and wildlife rehabilitation. So it is fun to have made the shift back and to be working for the National Audubon Society. And I would like to emphasize National Audubon Society because there are all kinds of Audubon societies, even here in Connecticut. Sometimes when I say who I work for, people will say, oh, do you know Miley Bull? Do you know Patrick Cummins? Do you know Andy Resnickevich? And I say, yes, I know them, I've worked with them, I love them to bits, and they work for Connecticut Audubon. And people say, well, don't you work for Connecticut Audubon? And I say, no, I work for Audubon Connecticut. It's different. Audubon Connecticut is part of the National Audubon Society. Connecticut Audubon is an independent state Audubon society, and nobody really cares, except that sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. So we like to start off specifying which Audubon we're coming from. So just so I have some idea, if you have ever been to the Sharon Audubon Center up in the northeast corner, could you put your hand in the air? Oh, great. Okay. Wonderful. Those of you who haven't been, we are a nature center, an Audubon center and wildlife sanctuary, mostly up in the northeast corner. We have two large tracts of land in Sharon. One is the Sharon Audubon Center. The other one is called the Emily Winthrop Miles Sanctuary. A third piece is right down the road and around the corner, as a lot of you probably know, the Edith Leopold Sanctuary, which was also donated to Audubon, Connecticut. And we hope to actually have a sign up there soon. So tonight, what I would like to do is introduce you to some of the other critters who work at Sharon Audubon. They have a job. There are ambassador birds. And I would like to tell you a little bit about how we come to have the birds that we do. We have not only close to 3,000 acres of preserved land that's simply wildlife sanctuary, we also have aviaries with resident birds of prey on exhibit. And behind the scenes, we have a very active wildlife rehabilitation clinic. Takes in close to 1,000 admissions a year. And that's mostly birds, with a sprinkling of mammals and reptiles. And we try to get as many of those birds as possible released back to the wild. But sometimes we get partway there and not all the way there. So if a bird is recovered, but not recovered enough to survive on its own, sometimes it becomes one of our resident raptors and one of our ambassador birds. Sometimes it's not an injury. Sometimes it's just that the bird has become imprinted on people instead of on its own species, which would make it not very good at being a wild bird. So some of those birds also stay permanently. The majority of our disabled birds come in because they're either, well, they collide with something man-made, human-made. They're either car strikes or building strikes, dog attacks, cat attacks, various other mishaps. So that's usually the cause of their injury. And most of our birds have a story behind them. So here's what I'm going to do. I have 2 owls and 1 hawk. I was told, we want to hear mostly about owls, but bring along a hawk for comparison. So I did. And what I'll be doing is taking them out one at a time, talking about that individual bird and a little bit about that bird species. I'll try to walk it around a little bit so that a lot of people can get a closer look at it. And I'll take a few questions about that bird before it goes back in the box, and then we move on to the next one. And then hopefully if there are general questions at the end, we can go on to those. So here's how it goes. Our first bird is a small one. Okay. This is an owl that a lot of people may not even know lives in their neighborhood or in their backyard. And that's because its needs are kind of compatible with living near people. There we go. Yeah, I'll take this tether out. A little bit of terminology here. This is a falconer's glove. I don't really need it for protection against this bird, but the bird needs it for something bulky and stable to stand on, because my arm is kind of gross and squishy and wobbly, you know, so we need a good solid thing for this bird to stand on. This is a tether. Looks like a dog leash. Yes, question? If you don't have a flash, yes. Yeah, yeah. The question is it okay to take pictures? And yes. The tether is attached to leather bracelets around this bird's ankles that are known as jesses. And that means that if this little owl tries to fly away for some reason, he's not going to end up on the floor or hitting a wall or otherwise getting into trouble. We can keep him right close to my glove. Okay, so let's do this. I will ask, and I have to ask this of myself too, try not to pop up and surprise the bird with a gesture if I happen to come near to you. Okay. Hey, Artemis, coming up. Here you go. Okay. In the front row, could you hear a little bit of a clicking? That little click, 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 click. That's Artemis clicking his beak at me, or rather her beak. Artemis. 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 Hey there. Hey there. How you doing? Okay. Now I'm going to walk Artemis around to the front here. And those of you who can get a good close look at her, see if you can tell me why she's living with us. Can you tell? Yeah. Yeah, she only has one useful eye. She was hit by a car and had such a bad eye injury that she lost the vision in one eye. And you can imagine that's serious for an owl. Now, they need very good night vision, and they need very good depth perception, which you don't have if one of your eyes is not functioning. An owl's eyes are pretty fascinating to begin with. They always look like they're staring right at you, because they are always staring right at you, because an owl cannot look at you out of the corner of its eye. It can't roll its eyes the way we do. So no matter how disgusted an owl is, it can't give you an eye roll. But its eyes are pretty much fixed, looking forward. Her eyes are huge. They take up most of her head. And that gives her very good light perception. And, well, it used to give her very good light perception and a good ability to see depth and see her prey. But it also means, because her eyes don't move, it also means that she can hunt very well with her ears. Because if she tunes her ears to a little sound, you know, like a little mouse or a little rustle in the forest floor, and she gets her head just set so that the sound is equal in each ear, then her eyes are looking in the direction she should be going. And she can flutter down, and she grabs her prey with her feet. Okay. So speaking of prey, we often call this a bird of prey. But bird of prey is kind of a loose term, just like predator is. You know, a cat is a predator. A wolf is a predator. A tiger is a predator, because they all hunt some other kind of animal. But they're not that closely related to each other. So we call hawks and owls and eagles all birds of prey. But they aren't really that closely related to each other. Has anybody here ever seen or heard a whippoorwill? Yeah, kind of soft, fluffy, really well camouflaged birds that say. Well, the ancestors of whippoorwills and owls were probably kind of soft, fluffy birds. And one line developed into whippoorwill type birds. They got more whippoorwilly. And the other line got more owly. And if you really look at this little owl and think about it, she's a little bit like a whippoorwill. She's got the same little bristles around her beak. She's got the same beautifully camouflaged plumage. And screech owls, this is a screech owl, by the way. Screech owls don't screech. They have a nice, sweet little whistle that's sort of... And sometimes it goes down like a little whinny. I'm doing it because I can't get her to do it.
Yeah. Is she full grown?
She is full grown.
Okay.
Yeah, this is as big as a screech owl gets. And if you're really, really lucky, you'll see one in a cavity in a hollow tree. They nest in hollow trees, and they also roost in hollow trees. And they'll just be sitting there looking exactly like the tree.
Yeah.
And these little, let me see, can I touch you? Are you going to let me put your ear tufts up? No. Okay. When a screech owl is nervous, it will pull all its feathers in tight, stand up really straight, and stick up the tufts on the top of its head. And it looks just like a piece of dead wood. So its behavior helps to camouflage it.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to walk around a little bit so that you can get a better look at Artemis. And we'll talk about what she eats, where she likes to live. What do you think Artemis eats? Anybody want to guess? Yes. Mice. That's one of the primary things that she would eat. If you look at her feet, they're just about big enough to grab a mouse. But she'll also eat a lot of insects. You know, she's not too proud to grab a big moth or a eel or a great fish. Some screech owls will actually catch small fish, which doesn't seem like a lot of yeah, full disclosure, I never watched the screech owl fish, but I've watched them hunting for other things. And what they do is they'll sit on a branch and just look and wait and look and wait, and then they'll flutter down on something. And I would expect that that's what they do right on the edge of the stream.
Which is her good eye?
I'm sorry?
Which is her good eye?
Her good eye is her left eye, which is on your right. When I get a little closer, it's much easier to see which eye is out of order. So, screech owls come in colors, different colors. This is a gray phase screech owl. Sometimes you'll see a red screech owl, which is sort of a rusty, russet color. Same basic pattern. The gray are more common around here than the red. And then there's also a brown phase of screech owl. Never cries. No, actually, one of the fun things is trying to guess an owl's weight, and we're going to try that in the next
I have a silly question. Can all owls turn their heads all the way around to the back?
Yes, and that's not a silly question because owls do things that don't look possible. And the question was, can owls turn their heads all the way around? Well, it depends on where they're starting from. If I'm an owl and I'm looking straight forward, first of all, I have twice as many bones in my neck as a person does. So I've got a lot more flexibility in my neck. I also really need to be able to move my head because, remember, I can only stare straight ahead. So when an owl starts to turn its head, it can go around, and I'm not going to demonstrate. It can go around 270 degrees. Yeah, about 3/4 of the way. And then, you know, it can go around past the starting point and go around 270 degrees the other way. So if you look at it that way, they can certainly do the whole circle. but then their heads do not unscrew. Okay, so what we're going to do is give you a chance to go back in your box. Did people notice her feet on the way by, how her feet are feathered? You know, it looks like she's wearing socks. Owls like this can stay here year-round. You might wonder how such a little bird can manage to stay the whole winter, but our screech owls really do stay their year-round residence. They might wander away from their nesting territory a little bit in the winter, but this is one of our year-round birds. So any other questions about Artemis before she goes back in? Yeah.
What does the cage look like?
What does the cage look like? The aviary that Artemis is in, I couldn't give you the dimensions off the top of my head, but it's about 10 feet by 12 and about 10 feet high. And there's a nest box, there's a cavity box in there so that when she wants to go inside and feel comfortable as if she's in a hollow tree, she can do that. And she shares that with 2 other disabled screech owls. And quite often you'll see them all kind of scrunched up against each other. They seem to like to sit next to one another on their perches.
How about the winter?
In the winter, as I said, she's very well feathered and she can handle fairly cold weather. But in the wintertime, our aviaries have heat panels in them so that the birds can get close to a heat source. And on very cold nights, when we know the forecast is going to be extremely cold, especially if there's a bird that's older or a bird that might be recovering from an illness or something like that, we'll just go out and get them and bring them inside. Not where it's warm, because that's too big a contrast, but to where it's not quite so cold. So that's what we do. Yes?
You didn't mention that they have silent flight.
Everybody listen. Anybody hear anything? No. That's something that is even more conspicuous with the next owl. And there's a reason for it. There's a reason for it in that it's good for an owl to be able to sneak up on its prey. But I mean, the way they can do that is by having extremely soft feathers. If you were able to touch Artemis's feathers and then touch the feathers of something like a duck or a pigeon, you'd really feel the difference in texture. Owl feathers feel as though they're coated in velvet because they do have a fuzzy surface on them. And the very front feather of their wings, if you could look at it closely, is got a fringe on it. So even when the wing is cutting through the air, it doesn't make a sound. So they're very, very good at being quiet birds. Okay, Artemis, ready to go back? There we go. Now you might think that, this poor bird, it's getting put back in this little bitty box, but this is actually the sort of place where a screech owl feels safe. So, can you see her looking into it? Put me in already. There you go. Gonna hop in? Go for it. She's got a little perch in there. It's padded. There we go. There you go. Okay. Good going. All right. Okay. So. Our next bird is one of the birds that we call an imprint. This bird is named Sophia, and she's been with us for a number of years. Some of our birds actually get quite elderly. Birds like this in captivity will last several years longer than wild hawks and owls usually do. So Sophia has been with us for quite a while. And we'll see if anybody recognizes what kind of owl she is. I'm going to take her out.
What is their lifespan?
Up to 30 years. Yeah. Great horned owls will be, an old great horned owl will be 28, 30 years old. They don't usually last that long in the wild. There's just too much going on out there. Yeah. You might wonder how we know whether our birds are males or females. Sometimes we don't, but sometimes they drop us a little clue, like laying an egg. So we know Sophia is a female. And we can also make a guess from the size of the bird, because in birds of prey, the larger birds tend to be the females. So we can make an educated guess just by the adult size of the bird. Hello, Sophia. How are you? How about this? Okay. There we go. So does anybody know which kind of owl this is? A barred owl. Just as screech owls don't screech, barred owls don't show you the barring on their feathers unless you turn them around. And that beautiful brown and white horizontal striping is what the word barred refers to. It's not that the owl is a great poet. It's that the owl has horizontal bars on its feathers.
Why is she so long?
She's an imprint, and when we raise orphaned baby birds, orphaned raptors in our rehab center, we make every effort not to imprint the bird. We will use puppets, we will use masks, we will do whatever we have to do to not let the bird see that it's being fed by people. In fact, when we can, we get those baby birds back out with adult owls. Either we try to get them back reunited with their parents, which we just did this spring with baby great horned owl, and it was quite an epic. It took almost a week before we were sure that the adult birds were back feeding the baby again. Or we'll foster it out to some other owls or other hawks that might be willing to take in an extra nestling. But when we can't do that, we try to avoid imprinting the bird. But sometimes we'll get a bird that somebody has hand-raised with just sort of full interaction, and the bird is really oriented to people. So that was Sophia's story. She's perfectly fit. She's kind of an older owl at this point, but she's in good physical condition. And we can talk about how your head turns around. What are you looking at? There we go. And now here's a perhaps more convincing demonstration of how silent an owl's flight is. Okay. Did you hear anything? Yeah. Another thing that's interesting about Sophia is her apparent size. What's really fun is to bring Sophia into a classroom at school and say, how much do you think this owl weighs? So I'm going to ask you, how much do you think this owl weighs? Anybody want to guess? Guess? 5 pounds? Good guess. 2 pounds? Yep. Yep. You have a good eye because we get guesses like 20 pounds, which makes me feel really strong. But actually, if I were to take my finger and try to find Sophia's neck right now, I would bury my finger almost its entire length before I got to her thin little neck. She's almost all feathers. And that's typical of a lot of birds. Birds are very lightweight critters. They have air sacs in their bones, and they have very lightweight structures in having feathers. They're one of the lightest, strongest kind of structures that you find on any animal. And she's also got some other lightweight features that she shares with other birds. She doesn't have teeth. Can you imagine trying to fly with a big load of teeth in the front of your face? So bird Digestion tends to happen inside, closer to their center of gravity. Also, and this is always a fun fact, did you know that birds don't have bladders? I mean, why would you hold it when that means you have to carry it? So they tend to just let loose whenever they need to and not carry around that extra weight when they're flying. So back to being an owl, back to being a barred owl. You're most likely to see a barred owl in Connecticut someplace kind of damp. They like wetter woods, near streams, near swamps, someplace where there's a lot of forest cover, and maybe some dense tangle underneath with a few clearings. What, is my glove not comfortable enough? Yeah.
Did we feel
Here
her
we go.
talon or her claw?
Yeah, but she's not grabbing me.
Okay.
She's just balancing.
Oh,
Okay, if she were upset or if she were hunting, this would be an issue that she's holding onto my sleeve. But really, the reason I'd want her back on my glove is it's just a more stable place for her to stand. But no, this doesn't hurt. Barred owl is the one who says, "Who cooks for you?" Yeah, yeah. And then they kind of egg each other on. So then it becomes, yeah, and it sounds like you've got a troop of monkeys. So, yeah, they can really get going. So those are the owls communicating with each other, doing territorial squabbles or doing courtship. And when they're not doing that, they're often hunting things like chipmunks, snakes, and a surprising amount of aquatic stuff. Again, this is an owl that might go after a frog or a crayfish or even a fish. I once watched a barred owl try to fly in our living room window to get at a turtle that we had in an aquarium at 11 in the morning. That's another thing about barred owls is more often than other owls, you can see them in the daytime. Because sometimes they will hunt in the daytime. I'm going to be a little more careful walking around with Sophia. I don't want to hold her over anybody for reasons that I won't bother to go into. But I do want to give you a good look at her, and if you have any questions, I'll take them as we're going around. Hey, Sophia.
Is it common for them to stay on the ground at all?
I'm sorry?
Is it common for them to be on the ground at all?
They wouldn't spend a lot of time on the ground. Their hunting technique is not that different from the screech owl in the sense that they'll sit on a perch and keep an eye out for something likely going by, and then they'll flutter down on it. Sometimes they'll even hover over it before they grab it. Have you seen barred owls on the ground?
I've seen one in the yard on the ground that took off real quick as soon as I pulled it in the yard.
Yeah, it might have just tried to catch something, and you caught it right after the attempt. Okay. Would you like to get a little bit more comfortable here? Yeah, please. Okay. One of the things that makes barred owls look so distinctive is they're the only owls that we have in the area with dark eyes. A friend of mine who does these programs says that barred owl kind of looks like everybody's grandmother. I think that's a compliment. And while she's going by, you might take a look at the beautiful outline of her face. It's called the facial disc on an owl. And that actually helps funnel sound into their ears. Their faces are basically big sound receptors because they do a lot of their hunting with their ears, even though their eyes are very good. Their ears are a great help. Well, if she were tolerant of it, I could show you her ears, but I don't think she'd appreciate it particularly, so I will demonstrate. She's got flaccid skin on her face on either side, and that's sort of the receiving dish. And if I were to take the edge of that flap and do this, She's got an ear down here, pretty much where our ears are. And it's a surprisingly big hole, a surprisingly big oral opening for her to receive sound. Sorry, question? Question?
For a number of years, I've had a pair of owls behind my house in the woods, and the thing that really surprised me is that they vocalize like 3 in the afternoon, bright daylight now. I've also heard them at night when there'll be one over here and you hear one way off. But in the middle of the day, with the sun out, they're vocalizing.
What time of the year were you hearing that?
Their nest dwell.
Right about now?
Yeah, they come every year, the end of March, first part of April, and they must use the same nest every year. It's basically over the same direction behind my house.
Yeah, that's great. I hear a lot of barred owls during the daylight hours as well, doing bird surveys out in the woods. It's not at all uncommon for us to pick up a barred owl during daylight. So they really are less strictly nocturnal than some of the other owls. Question?
About 2 years ago, I started hearing this wheezing noise,
Yeah.
and I looked out my window, and there were 3 baby owls, big barred owls,
Yep.
back at me, and making this wheezing noise, and I wasn't quite sure what was going on, so I looked it up on the internet, and found out that it happens when the mothers stop feeding them.
Yeah, they're begging. They're calling to be fed by the mother.
Yeah, it went on for about a week, and I'm thinking to myself, these things are going to starve here. I called Sharon Outline.
Well, I hope that what we told you was that that's a phase in the development of baby owls where we call them branchers. They're too big to be in the nest, and it's the natural time for them to get out of the nest and start fluttering around on branches, but they're still being fed by their parents for several weeks afterwards. So they're sitting out there. They look a little bit fluffy still, but they've got most of their flight feathers grown in, and they're going, and they're begging for the parents to come back and feed them, which they do.
So, okay, I thought they weren't feeding them, they were forcing them to go, fend for themselves.
Well, sooner or later, the feeding tapers off. But hunting is a skill, and they have to practice it quite a bit and be getting handouts while they get better at it.
Yeah, the person asked me, they're like, are they on the ground? And I'm like, no, they're in the tree. Like, oh, they're fine.
Yeah, they're fine. Yeah.
Do they see just as well
Oh, there you go.
at night as they do in the day?
Do they what?
See just as well at night as
Yes.
they do in the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Sophia, I'm going to let you go back. Okay. Put this here. And hop in. Go ahead. Go ahead. There you go. There you go. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, Sophia is a curious owl. There are times in the winter time when we had some really cold spells this winter where, because she's an older owl, we didn't want to leave her out in the aviaries a lot. So she was inside, but our inside spaces, to house the owls during cold weather are not as roomy as the outside spaces. So, we thought, well, we'll give Sophia a little time out in one of our workrooms. So there was Sophia standing on the copier, looking out the window like this. You could tell she was really taking an interest in what was going on outdoors, and she really wanted to be back out in her aviary. So she takes an interest in what's going on. There we go. Now, the hawk that we brought along for comparison is interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that I can just compare hawks with owls, and that's fun. But because we just looked at a barred owl, it's kind of interesting to consider this hawk, because this owl and this hawk have very similar job descriptions. They just work different shifts. If you're going to look for a barred owl, you're going to look in damp woods, possibly near a wetland, closed canopy forest with some undergrowth, and it's a bird that hunts rodents, small reptiles, maybe some aquatic animals, maybe some shrews, maybe some moles, things like that. This hawk does almost the same thing and lives in a very, very similar kind of habitat. It just does most of its hunting in the daytime. And it prefers slightly more open forests. So we're going to take a look at our red-shouldered hawk.
It's called a red-shouldered?
Red-shouldered hawk. And just as the screech owl does not screech, and the barred owl has bars that are hard to see, the red-shouldered hawk doesn't really have red shoulders. It has red wrists. Because when we look at a bird and we say, oh, that bird's shoulder is right there, that's not really the bird's shoulder when you think about it. That's the bird's wrist. And his shoulders are buried in the feathers way back close to his body. So whenever we talk about a bird's shoulders, we're really talking about his hands. So this is a red-wristed hawk, but that's not what we call it.
There are red-tailed hawks.
Yes, and those tails are really red. Okay. So this is Oban. Oban is another imprint. So there's nothing physically wrong with Oban, but she's a little too people-oriented. So here we go. There we go. Yeah. I want to thank whoever set us up to get this beautiful sunset light. Birds. It's really dramatic. So it might actually even be hard to see the red shoulders or the red wrists on this hawk right now, because even the wrists are tucked in to Oban's feathers right now. But take a look at the difference in bills. Okay. Now you can tell that the owls are really built for looking straight ahead and having good binocular vision. But Oban has excellent forward vision as well. Just better vision to either side at the same time. And you can see that this is a bird of prey by taking a look at Oban's feet. And there's your flat ones for us. Nope, you're just too chill. Okay.
Just taking a while.
Yeah. Yeah, and we try not to surprise the birds with anything, because that's one of the things that makes an experience stressful for the birds. So when we're getting the birds conditioned to be ambassador birds, it's a very gradual process, and we get them accustomed to one step of this at a time. And the goal is to get them to the point where they will willingly just step up on your glove and sit there very calmly, or walk up your shoulder. And then when the program is over, that they just very calmly hop back in their boxes, because they're doing something that they're accustomed to and that is particularly frightening.
So when you're blind and you see something on the ground,
Oh yeah. Yeah, their vision is much, much better than ours. Thank you. We just got rid of some excess weight, as I was saying. There's a way of thinking about it that's a little bit misleading, but birds of prey have such acute vision. It's as if they always have a pair of 8-power binoculars. You know, they can see the detail of a prey animal at a much greater distance than we can, so that they can pick it out from a long way off.
right.
But interestingly enough, a red-shouldered hawk lives in the woodlands around here and is not the sort of hawk that soars and looks down upon the ground below for the prey far away and does some incredible stooping dive like a peregrine falcon, or comes spiraling down like a red-tailed hawk. The red-shouldered hawks tend to sit somewhere in the woods and watch for prey, and when they see a chipmunk, or they see a snake, or they see a young squirrel or something like that, they'll just launch from a branch and do a high-speed grab. And if there's nothing going on, they'll just go to another part of the woods and try it again. And sometimes they will do a surprise attack. They'll come in low and fast and try to catch something unawares. So this time of year, the red-shouldered hawks are mostly feeding their young. Their young are a little bit younger than barred owls. Owls nest very early in the season. So you might even be seeing barred owl branchers at this point. The red-shouldered hawks still have young in the nest right now, and the males and females are both bringing food to the nest. And if you happen to be walking in the woods and you hear, "Gear, gear, 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 gear," this ringing sound that sort of echoes through the woods, that's the red-shouldered hawks defending their nests. And sometimes they'll be aggressive defending their nests, but you don't need to worry about them like breaking your neck or taking your eyes out or anything like that. What are there?
Yeah, they're predators.
Birds this size, a bird of prey this size, would have to look out for a great horned owl, and not a whole lot else.
Right.
Yeah, these birds that are at or close to the top of the food chain are more likely to be taken out by accidents or by disease. Some birds will get a fungal disease in their respiratory systems called aspergillosis. That can take them down. Another thing that affects a lot of our birds now in late summer and early fall is West Nile virus. We get a fair number of birds into our rehab center that are very emaciated, and they're dehydrated, and they have neurological symptoms. Either their eyes are kind of messed up, or their posture is strange. And we don't have them all tested because it's expensive, but usually we assume that that's West Nile virus. And a few of them recover, and the therapies for treating them are getting a little better, so some more of them are recovering now. But it does kill a lot of our birds, and we see a lot of that late in the summer. Question?
What about their nests? How big and what are their nests composed of?
These birds' nests, thank you for asking that. There's kind of an interesting thing about barred owls and red-shouldered hawks. These red-shouldered hawks will build quite often in the crotch of a tree, right where the tree is forking, or they'll build on a branch close to the trunk. And it's hard for me to talk with my hands right now because I only have one hand. But the nest might be about 16 inches or so across, built of sticks. And sometimes barred owls will nest in hollow trees, but sometimes barred owls will nest in red-shouldered hawk nests. They have that similar a habitat, and it's really is like one's the day shift and one is the night shift. And of course, they don't do it the same year, but they will alternate years sometimes. I mean, it's not a rule or anything like that, but it has been observed that one year barred owl will show up and refurbish a nest and use it, and the next year a pair of red-shouldered hawks is using that nest. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Yes?
Are they very noisy? I have a pair of hawks out in the back, and
Yeah.
they are extreme all the time.
If they're really noisy and they're doing that
Yeah,
call, that's red-shouldered hawks. Yeah. So that's probably a pair. I'm hearing them a lot in the woods these days.
I'm
Yeah.
not well.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of nests, there's a really fun fact about screech owl nests that I forgot to mention. Screech owls nest in cavities. Now, you can imagine the inside of that cavity can get kind of grungy after a while. And little invertebrates can be living in that duff at the bottom of the hollow tree, including bird parasites. And believe it or not, at least in some parts of the country, screech owls have been observed catching blind worm snakes, which eat insects, bringing them to the nest alive, and just letting them live in the nest. And presumably, that's beneficial for the owls because that little snake is in there cleaning up some of the insects that are in the nest. Did you have a question? You had a question?
Yeah.
Oh, what's your question? It might be. The question is, if a barred owl wants to use its nest and finds out that a red-shouldered hawk is using it this year, what happens? Well, the thing is, the barred owls nest earlier than the red-shouldered hawks do. So in any given year, the barred owl is going to have first choice at it. And so it would be more the red-shouldered hawk showing up to use its old nest and going, what's this owl doing in my nest? And then they may just build a nest elsewhere because red-shouldered hawks can do that. Okay, I'm going to walk Oban around. And if there are any other questions, yes, in the back.
I presume that hawk will migrate. How far south will it migrate in the winter?
Yeah, the red-shouldered hawks are very widespread in the United States. And the ones that live in the southwest and in the south don't migrate at all. And red-shouldered hawks here will go some way south, but they're not long-distance migrants. So this bird might go, say, halfway down the Atlantic coast, might go as far as Florida. There are a lot of red-shouldered hawks in Florida in the wintertime. So, you know, it might go as far as Florida, or it might not. It might go just partway there, just to where there's not so much snow and it's plentiful prey. The hawks have very good hearing. And red-shouldered hawks in particular, it's thought that they hunt partly by sound. And that might be because a lot of their prey can be found right under the leaf litter, like little mice burrowing right below the surface. But the owls just are much better at hunting by sound. Their whole face is constructed for catching sound. Well, they do have some bare skin around their beaks and on their eyelids and on their feet. So, and there are mosquitoes that specialize in birds, which might be why we don't get as much West Nile as the birds get. But there is plenty of bare skin that the mosquitoes have. And by the way, this bird can turn its head around as many degrees as an owl can, but it just never gets any credit for it. This bird's an imprint. And you really can tell the imprints because a perfectly fit bird of prey is just so impressive to look at. What do you think? I'm going to go around behind. I'm sorry? Cooper's hawk has a nasal voice, and it's kind of I can't do a Cooper's hawk very well, but it's a short, sharp, repeated nasal call. Okay. That's true of some of the other hawks. So what I just did is not diagnostic. I wish I knew the particulars of how we came by Oban. Since it is an imprinted bird, I suspect that some other rehab center called us and said, we have a perfectly fit bird, but it's imprinted and we don't have room for it. There's a lot of communication in the wildlife rehab network that way. So the reason that we find it so important to come out into the community with birds like this is that people are so interested in birds. And one of the things I find myself saying to people a lot when they come with a cat carrier or a cardboard box that has holes punched in it and something that they've picked up off the road or out in the backyard is, thank you so much for caring about a bird like this. And they say, well, thank you for having a rehab center, because we called all over and we didn't know where to bring the bird. And in truth, this does not make a big difference to bird populations. There are a lot of red-shouldered hawks out there, although the populations of all three of these birds seems to have gone down some. They're not considered to be in a great deal of danger right now of being extirpated in Connecticut. But we don't do it to try and restore the populations of these birds, because after all, our best effort can only put a couple of hundred birds back in the wild every year. And the number of birds that are taken out of the population by car strikes, building strikes, dogs and cats, particularly cats, every year is estimated to be in the billions. Okay, so this isn't going to save bird populations, but what it does is it gives everybody a really close look at a really magnificent creature, and it gets us all motivated to make sure that the places that they live can continue to be protected so that they can continue to live out there. So we're really, really grateful to the birds for being such wonderful teachers and wonderful ambassadors. I think I would be willing to bet that a year from now, most of what I say is just going to be sort of something vague in your head, but you'll have this really, really vivid memory of what it was like to look into this bird's eyes and have this bird look back at you. And we have a responsibility to try and keep the places where they live livable for them. So that's a great deal of what Audubon does. We're a bird conservation organization, and this is just one piece. Some of the other pieces are trying to pass good legislation that's protective of birds and wildlife, doing summer camps, doing bird walks, if you're ever interested in doing bird identification in the field, and a whole host of other things that I would be happy to talk about later. But any other questions before Oban goes back into her box? Okay.
Is her white spot here characteristic of her breed?
Her white spot.
Of her beak?
Right, her beak?
Yeah.
Yes. I just wanted to make sure she didn't have something stuck to her face before I answered. Yeah, there is a patch of bare skin at the base of the beak called the cere, C-E-R-E. And that bright yellow color can be part of the courtship color for some of these birds. The coloration of the skin around on their faces can get very bright. Okay, Oban, what do you think? I need to think of what you think. Okay. Back you go. There. Okay. Perhaps for you. Well, how can you not? Right? I was out this morning. Remember what a beautiful morning it was? Doing an informal bird survey with one of our supporters. And I said, Joe, I can't believe I get paid for this. So one of the most inspiring things about the work, though, is...
I think Oban got you.
I'm sorry? Oban got me? I thought he did.
On the backside.
On the back, yeah.
Just so you know.
Yeah, I kind of felt that. But one of the most fun parts of this job is that we really feel like we're serving a community of people who really care about wildlife and care about nature and care about conservation. And part of what we want to do is just make it as easy as possible for people who want to participate, who want to do something constructive, who want to be engaged, who want to be part of the right stuff happening, give them a way to do that. And so, you know, part of it is, oh, well, can you come and volunteer at our center? But a lot of it is just what you can do around your home, your neighborhood, your community, your town to make bird habitat better. And that's another big part of our outreach program. So if you ever have any interest in talking to us about any of that, or in having some of these birds come and visit, or having a bird walk, I hope you'll feel free to contact us, because you're the conservation movement. You know, we're the facilitators, but it's all the people in the country who own all the habitat in the country who are really going to make the difference for bird conservation. So thanks again for the invitation, and I will stop.
Thank you, Eileen. That was great. What a fantastic program. You're a great ambassador yourself for Sharon Audubon. As a small token of our appreciation, we'd like to give you a calendar.
I need my eyeballs.
And so that more or less wraps it up. Our next speaker series program will be September 23rd, and the topic will be ticks.
I wish I'd followed that one.
Please join us for some refreshments on the kitchen area. Thank you. Thank you again for coming.